Hey guys, Blue Spooky here. Before we start, I just wanted to let you guys know this is the very first episode of Trick or Truth. We're going to find out how this goes, but one of the 4 stories I've read here tonight is a fictional story that I've written based on something in true life. What you guys are going to have to do is try and guess which one of these is the fictional story. When you think you've got it, leave a comment below stating which story you think it is. If you want to find out which one is actually the fake story, stick around until all of them had been read, and at the very end of the video, I'll tell you which one I wrote and what it's based on. Without further ado though, I will let you guys get right into the stories. I hope you enjoy. A little bit of background. Growing up, I used to go with my mom to work. Sometimes she occasionally couldn't find a babysitter. Usually, it was fun to walk around the store and help with the little things here and there. That being said though, it was in a very bad part of town, in a not-so-good city as well. I grew up around transients, homeless people, drug addicts. In hindsight, it was probably a good thing it let me see they were just normal people in hard times. But it also gave me a bit of a sixth sense for people as well, since robberies would happen while I was in the store before, and other dangerous things like that. My mom would always keep me cooped up in a little office in the back, so I was never really in much danger. One day though, my mom had to go into the store to pick up some check stubs, so I came with her. There was usually this homeless guy named Randy out front. He never really caused any problems though, and the entire store knew him. So they'd let him just sit there to rest on rainy days, like it was that particular day. We walked inside. My mom told me to go wait by the registers and stand there for a little bit. I started leaning on things and playing with the buttons of a broken cash register right next to the exit. I should also say today was an especially dead day at the store, so there was only one check stand open at the other end of the line. As I was pushing those buttons, I suddenly felt a tug on my shirt like someone was behind me. I assumed it must be my mom. I turned around, only to see a middle-aged couple that had deep wrinkles on them. The man of the couple smiled at me.
"Hi there, kiddo. Wondering if you want to buy a puppy maybe? We have a few in our car. We can go show you one if you want, see if you want to purchase."
I immediately felt really bad vibes from these people. My mom had always told me about people saying things like that growing up, so this put me on high alert right away. I tried to get past them and said something about needing to tell my mom first and ask if I could go with them. As I was trying to walk around though, the man suddenly grabbed me by my arm and started to drag me away to the door. Immediately, I grasped onto the edge of the register and hung on for dear life while screaming for my mom. This old man didn't look like he would be that strong, but compared to the strength of a small kid, it felt like trying to fight against a bear. Eventually, he of course pried me off of the thing. I was ready to turn around and brawl tooth and nail if need be. I was going to make sure that if they took me, at least I would go out with some noise. Just as I turned around though, Randy was standing right there, staring at us. "Hey, is everything okay?" The woman came in this time and said in a hurried tone, "Oh, yes, he's our son. Come on, Greg." I screamed out, "My name is..." insert name here. Just then, my mom came around the corner. She called out to the guy holding me and rushed over, separating us. Then she said in a deadly serious tone, "Can I ask why you were just holding my son?" The couple seemed to stop for a moment and think over their options. The woman just said this, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I thought that was our son. Well, we better go look for ours." They rushed right past Randy out the door. I told my mom what happened when they left. She thanked Randy profusely afterward and held my hand every time we went to the store after. In 2003, I had met a guy that said he would take me on some grand adventures and make my life very exciting. Little did I know when I embarked on this adventure, that the safe world I had grown up in was about to get shattered. I lived in a small town and had never really traveled outside of my state. I never experienced life in a way that others might. In my town, we were kind of sheltered from the big crime and other things that have been happening over the countryside. My now ex decided to take me on a journey of being an over-the-road trucker. In a lot of cases, this was actually a great experience. There were a lot of fun times, and I got to see quite a lot of the US that I might otherwise not have. But trucking is really hard, and being on the road 24/7 is not an easy lifestyle. Being cooped up in a small truck with someone else for that long will cause anyone to become mad. Life on the road is much different now than it was when I was trucking. We now have a lot of advancements in technology. The ability to binge watch your favorite YouTube channel on demand or surf the web, play games on your phone to keep yourself occupied. But back then, the only forms of entertainment we had were either watching one of the dozen or so DVDs we owned, reading yet another book, or talking over the radio. Often this meant we opted for talking on the radio, and this became our version of social media, long before Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter were even a thought in someone's mind. Just like we do now, we'd create a different identity or persona to hide behind while interacting with people who were basically strangers. And trust me, though a lot of them can be nice, some truckers can be creepy as fuck. Keeping a bit of anonymity is the only real way to stay safe on the road. When you're a trucker, you acquire a CB handle. My ex's was Ninja Dwarf. Since I was a baby and I'm from Alaska, mine ended up being Northern Exposure. During the time on the road, you meet a lot of crazy people, and you see a ton of crazy shit as well. And I do mean a ton. Oftentimes though, when you hear those stories about things that can happen on the road, most of them are more gross than scary. You know, drivers getting a little too friendly with their cabin buddy, whether it be a dog, cat, or even a goat. But this time was one of the most terrifying experiences I ever had. And when it comes to strange and unusual events, well, my life is full of them, but this one takes the cake. Have you ever just gotten the heebie-jeebies immediately from hearing someone's voice? Like just flat out scared to talk to someone? A voice that kind of makes you think the person on the other end is not all there. That was this guy. Something about him immediately just made my skin crawl. Even though I'd only ever heard his voice through the crackle of the CB radio. The CB started to crackle, and we heard that distant call. You could barely even hear the voice through the static. Eventually though, he got close enough that we could hear him clearly. He must have been at least 50 or so miles behind us because it was still really faint. Our CB radio though was peaked and tweaked and could really reach out to touch someone. We could just about hear him through the other chatter. I heard it, that voice. It's hard to explain, but I guess the best way I could now describe it would be like Heath Ledger talking as the Joker in the Batman movie. There was just something off about it.
Hey there, Purple Pete.
The color of our truck.
Where you headed?
My ex hollered back we were heading to Arkansas. The driver said he was going the same way and asked if he could tag along with us. He introduced himself as Maniac. We would run from one coast to the other and back again. This guy somehow always seemed to be running the same route as us, but we never actually physically saw his truck. He described it as a 378 long-nosed Peterbilt that was black and had a brow and cattle guard. According to him, he ran dry box from California to Florida, which explained why he always seemed to be either coming or going over the I-10. One week, when we were running from Florida back to LA, we caught up to him on his back trip from Redmond, Washington to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He told us he would meet up with us in Nevada when we did our trip back. By that time, we would have run out of hours and needed to take a rest. We said sure, even though I really didn't want to meet this guy. My ex had become friends with him over the radio though, so we gave him an ETA on when we would be back in the area. We also told him what truck stop we would be at, and told him we would meet up with him for a meal. This was before the idea of having a cell phone for anything other than emergencies, so it wasn't like we could just call him when we were going to be in the area. He agreed to meet at that time, and we parted ways. My ex continued talking to him until the radios could no longer reach each other. We had just finished our load and were heading back to Las Vegas to the truck stop we agreed on, and we waited there. Las Vegas is kind of a shady place for truckers in general. Lots of crime and bad things happen, so we decided to wait in the truck. Finally though, after a long while, we got pretty bored. We ventured into the stop for a bit to look around. We waited, and waited, and waited, and eventually we killed enough time where we could take another load. We headed out, never actually meeting up with him in Nevada. A few months later though, we ran into him again in Oklahoma. Around that time we had heard some chatter on the radio about these lot lizards, slang for truck stop hookers, getting brutally murdered at truck stops in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. We just chalked it up to drama on the radio though. After all we truckers had quite literally nothing better to do than make up truck driver stories. We had kept hearing about this one though, and even brought it up to Maniac. He just laughed and said,
"Must be one real sick fuck doing it. It must be a story, because if it was true, they would have caught him already. I bet he even left fingerprints or semen at the crime scene or something. With it bloody and messy as it was, I bet he wants to get caught."
It seemed like such a weird thing to say, but he was a weird guy, so that was totally in character for him. Maniac went on his way and we went on ours for a while. After a while, I forgot all about that weird comment. Fast forward to a few weeks later. We were in Mississippi when we heard the familiar voice on the radio. It was Maniac. We had taken a long weekend because it was Labor Day. Most companies were okay with drivers taking an extra day off. Our plan was to make it to this lake out in the middle of nowhere. We were going to drop our trailer and head out bobtail. We chatted and he said he was going over to Tennessee. He would be heading out the next morning. Cutting our much-needed break short and bypassing the weekend at the lake, my ex decided to run with him so that there would at least be someone to talk to. We had gotten into an argument earlier, and I wasn't talking to him at the time. He absolutely hated the silent treatment. Our load this time was to deliver in North Carolina in a few days, so being a few hours ahead of the deadline just meant we would be at the top of the line to pick our load back. Win-win situation. We left that morning and headed out. The guys decided we would stop in Tennessee, and finally, after 6 months of chatting and planning, meet up with each other. Now, we weren't afraid to meet up with him or anything like that. I was very on edge though. I was no slouch. I grew up with 15 boys in the house and was a known fighter. My ex was a bigger dude, standing 6'3" and about 280 pounds. In theory, the two of us could easily take him if need be. The only way he would get the best of us was if he had a weapon, which back then was highly illegal to have in trucks. If you were caught by DOT, it was jail time, no questions asked. With our company, we had very specific fuel stations we could use to top off. Maniac was an owner-operator, so he could go anywhere. Maniac said he'd already stopped to get fuel, and took a shower as well. He would drop his trailer and meet us at Flying J, a petrol station that was just down the road from where he was. We get ready to fuel up, shower, and get a booth at the restaurant. We waited about 45 minutes before ordering food, and waited and waited. No one ever showed up, and there was no way to contact him either. My ex was not a patient man. We ate and then headed back to our truck. I remember it being very dark and humid. It was probably 10 p.m. or so at the time. There wasn't much noise in this truck stop, which was unnerving. A quiet truck stop is a dangerous truck stop. We walked across the fuel island to be greeted by a shit ton of flashing lights. It wasn't uncommon for either lizards to get busted or drivers to get involved in shit they're not supposed to, so we didn't think much of it at first. Cops and a truck stop kinda go hand in hand. This was more than just your typical truck stop shenanigans though. We passed 12 trucks or so. This was one of the bigger Flying J's, so it could probably fit about 80 if you went all the way back to the dirt. I'm a curvy girl, not fat, but I don't look like I belong in a truck stop, you know. I was used to drivers looking at me all creepy like. I always got taunted and harassed even though I was a driver as well. In fact, there were some truck stops that were not even safe to walk alone in. I was walking with my ex in that moment, and we weren't holding hands or anything, but I was obviously with him. We walked down the row and saw a bobtail truck parked in a full parking spot. I thought it was weird he was in that truck space with no trailer. Typically, they'd park at the end of a run and leave the big spaces for trucks with trailers. Again, that was another unspoken truck driver rule. We moved by this truck. It was dark, I think maybe dark black or blue, with a cattle guard and a brow. I don't remember seeing what type it was, just that it was kind of menacing in the dark. Old school trucker code was if you were looking for company, the driver would park and leave his reading red light on to tell lot lizards that the driver was looking for entertainment. The guy was sitting in the passenger seat. He had the red reading light on, so I could see his face. It was a little bit distorted, but he gave me the creepiest smile, then quickly shut his blinds. We were about 6 trucks down now. I could see his truck from ours. I remember looking back and seeing that red light still illuminating the porthole window in the passenger door. A small slit down the curtain showed a dark spot. He was obviously still watching us. Even as warm as it was, chills shot up my spine, and I got a very uneasy feeling suddenly. My gut wrenched with a feeling of dread. We got back to the truck though and turned on the CB for our night entertainment and see if we could radio Maniac to see what his deal was. The chatter was all about the cops and the ambulance fire truck and DOT. All the commotion was basically across from us but 2 rows up. People were saying there was a dead lot lizard, and it was really bad, like gnarly. We even heard one driver trying to explain it, but then he got told to shut the fuck up by a police officer. Being the nosy people we are, my ex and I jumped out of the truck to go investigate. We dodged in and out and managed to wiggle our way up to the scene. You know when you hear the phrase, "some things cannot be unseen"? This was one of them. That lady, what was left of her, had been tied to the trailer and the truck. Then someone pulled the kingpin, that piece that locks the two together, and let down the landing gear. The driver was now sitting in the back of a police car cuffed, his head limp with his forehead on the back of the seat. He was crying big heavy sobs and there was vomit all over his shirt. We could hear them through the closed door. He was wailing that he had nothing to do with this and praying to God to be forgiven for what had been done. It was obvious he had not done his safety check before he left and decided to just pull out of his space. While she was still attached, she got ripped apart, right in half. Without getting too graphic, I can tell you that a normal human body should never look like that. It was like something you might see in the Saw movies. I remember stumbling back and bumping into another driver. He just looked at me, pale, as if he looked like he was going to get sick. I don't do that well with body function, so I moved away from him and started making my way back. I was almost running back now, 0 fucks given that I should have waited for my ex because he had the keys. When I arrived, I tugged on the door, but it wouldn't open. I ran to the truck stop full speed. I was going to get sick, and I would rather not have people see me. I passed the spot where the bobtail truck was parked, only now it was gone. My ex made it to the truck stop looking for me and said he would walk me back so I could get some sleep. Yeah, like I could sleep after seeing all that. He turned on the radio and began to talk to the other drivers. No one had seen anything apparently. There hadn't even been much lizard traffic. The police had been working overtime cleaning up the stops after they had caught the scent of the first few murders. I sat in the bunk and just kind of stared out the windshield at the flashing lights. There was a sudden tap at the door. A police officer said he was getting statements from everyone there, giving us the rundown about safety and numbers and not to go anywhere alone. Needless to say, I was not planning on leaving the truck anytime soon though. I told him about that creepy guy that had smiled at me and the bobtail truck and the description of it as well. It seemed the officer didn't see the point of me telling him about some creepy guy, but he took down the information anyway. I don't think I slept for days after. I just kept seeing that horrifying image. Flashes kept going through my head. That vivid image of her face, a red rag in her mouth, and the 100-mile-per-hour tape around her wrists, tying her to the headache rack. She had obviously struggled for her life because there were bruises formed on her stomach and face. Mascara was running down her cheeks. It makes my stomach just queasy thinking about it. Didn't seem to faze my ex much though. He went on like it wasn't anything big or special. After a few weeks, I finally managed to get the image out of my head. or I had at least convinced myself it wasn't real, just a scene from a horror movie. Either way, I was glad for the time being to be relieved of that image. Fast forward to now February, about 3 months after that incident. We were heading down to New Orleans. I was super excited to see the area and hopefully get in to see Mardi Gras. I wanted to visit the cemeteries and see the mausoleums, go into the voodoo shops and such. We had a few extra hours to spend there, so I was really happy when my ex said we could go wandering around. We parked at this little truck stop. It was one that didn't show up on the big Rand McNally maps. We were actually told about it by another driver. It wasn't really more than a hole-in-the-wall mom-and-pop shop with a small dirt lot and a flickering light pole on one end. At least it was within walking distance of the French Quarter though, which is where I wanted to go.
"Hey there, Purple Pete. What brings you out this way?"
The voice on the CB was so loud, it was like he was really close. There were only 2 other trucks in the lot. An old Freightliner hauling a Swift trailer, and a dark green Kenworth that had a cattle car on the back hauling cows. My ex was still a bit miffed about being stood up months ago, and he could really hold a grudge when he wanted. "Maniac, hey man, where the hell you been? Why'd you stand us up there, good buddy?" My ex radioed back.
"Aw man, you know how it is. Cops make me a bit uneasy, and I'd rather not get fucking caught."
"Caught? What do you mean caught?"
Don't worry about it. You just keep an eye on your girl there. I'd really hate for something bad to happen to her, like all those other girls."
He trailed off. We watched the CB key light up again, burying the needle on the radio. It had to be the same stop for the ping to be so high. He was keyed up but kind of breathing into the mic now.
"You know, with all the bad things I've been doing in those truck stops, I like to play with the lizards before I torture them and destroy them. Those nasty sluts. They shouldn't be defiling themselves with the drugs and sex like they do."
It sounded like he was talking through gritted teeth now. His voice was even louder this time. We could hear the rumble of a truck heading down the one-way street that ended in the truck stop.
"Only God and the devil himself can judge me for my sins. I'll continue to rid the world of these diseased ones that plague humanity."
We looked at each other. This was the only time I'd ever seen anything like fear in my ex's eyes. Tears began to well up, and for the first time I was scared, truly scared for my life. A dust cloud came rolling up in the truck stop, and this dark black menacing Peterbilt with a cattle guard and brow came rolling slowly by. The driver keyed up just as he went past the nose of our truck. It was that same creepy guy from the stop months ago. He smiled that same disgusting smile at us as he put the mic right up to his lips.
"Be safe out there, ninja dwarf. Northern exposure."
His CB handle was pinstriped on his driver door. It said Maniac in bright red letters. In April of 2004, we headed back to Alaska because my ex's father had a massive heart attack. We stayed there for a while before heading back onto the road. As far as I know, there were 7 total murders. There could have possibly been more at the end. Who knows how long he had actually been ridding the world of its sins? I don't know if he was even ever caught. I can tell you one thing though. The second time around, I was not making friends with any random person on the road, and I always kept a 6-inch blade on me at all times, just in case I ever ran into another maniac. Okay, so before I start off this story and go into things, I want to ask you guys something. Have you ever been driving down a long, dark road at night and thought to yourself, damn, this would make the perfect place for an ambush, wouldn't it? I'd imagine that for most people, the thought would have never even crossed your mind, really. I mean, sure, you might see a long row with no streetlights or a big industrial complex road, and think to yourself it feels a bit creepy and a little bit empty, and then you just drive right past it, right? Nobody's there anyway. Who would ever want to drive down such an obviously sketchy area like that when you don't necessarily need to, right? Well, my friends, let me share with you my tale of the creepiest encounter of my life on one such dark, desolate road. This story occurred in late 2018 around the fall, maybe in September or early October, I think. The point is that around this time and in the area I live in, it gets dark really, really early. I'm talking about 5:45 to 6:15 sunsets around these parts. I had been out of high school for a few years at this point, and I was actually taking a gap year to sort of figure out all of my crap. I'd always been that lazy but brilliant kid, so I'd never really had to put any effort into my schooling at all. This meant I never really learned to properly study either. As you can imagine, I was doing pretty horribly into my first forays into college life. Still, I figured with a little bit of personal responsibility, I could still get my 2.0 GPA back on track. I kinda sorta did. Not really, that's a story for another time. More of a comedy of errors, really. To aid in my efforts of trying to better myself as a person, though, and get a little more wise in the ways of the world, I figured it was about time to get myself a job. Yeah, I know, 21 years old and I still never had a job, and still live with my parents as well. That's what I'm talking about with the whole trying to get my shit together thing. Needless to say, with my lack of experience, qualifications, or any basic skills really, it was kind of a tough ask to find my first job. I applied to every single retail store near me, CVS, Safeway, Walgreens, even the fast food places like KFC and Taco Bell. It seemed that nobody was willing to have a layabout like me at the time. Maybe it's because I was not the best at social interaction, so the interviewing process didn't exactly go very well. Well, as luck would have it, it turned out the exact perfect job for me was just opening up around my town. A job that needed no resume and only needed a warm body, ready and willing to learn basic skills. That's right, Amazon warehouse coming to a place near you. When I saw the position, I applied pretty much right away. There wasn't even an interview process at all, actually. Just show up, do your drug test, fill out the forms, take a photo for a potential worker ID, and then go home and wait for your day to show up at work. I was honestly kind of taken aback at how easy and simple the whole process was. Got the job that very same week, and before I knew it, I was off to work at this new place. I was extremely nervous at first, so I kind of overcompensated for this being my first job. I made sure to show up on the dot for every single shift, not even a single minute early or late. I would literally stand by the punch-in waiting for the clock to shift from 5:59 to 6 p.m. or whatever time the shift start was. Sure, you could technically cover the extra time with your PTO if you were late, but hey, I didn't want to be seen as lazy at my first job. Because of my overzealousness, I kinda burned myself out real quick like. Started to use the PTO I'd saved up from working so hard to cover entire shifts because I just didn't feel like showing up that day. Still though, I made absolutely sure to never receive any infarctions or write-ups or anything like that. I always worked real hard when I did show up too. At a point about 3 months into this line of work, the main road I would take to get to work started to undergo an absolute ton of construction work. It was never really consistent either. No signs saying this road will be closed from so-and-so time to so-and-so time. Instead, you just happen to be driving along when bam, suddenly there were a bunch of bulldozers and equipment blocking 2 lanes of the 4-lane street. This started to often put me in danger of being late when I had no PTO left to cover for that late time. I started to leave earlier to combat this, but sometimes even leaving up to an entire hour early was just barely enough time to make it in. Other times, I'd leave and get there with 30 minutes to spare. I started to look for alternative routes to work. This main road I took was a huge busy road with multiple entrances and exits to a big freeway. It also had several branching side streets where doctors' offices, businesses, and apartment complexes reside. I mean, surely with all of these branching roads, there had to be some more efficient way to arrive on time, right? Eventually, after about a week of searching, I did indeed find a good road that seemed to never have any traffic and would get me there on time every time. I found it just off a little offshoot road of an apartment complex in one of the more rural areas, a part of the suburbs where rural roads slowly morphed into city life. This particular road was a long stretch of about 15 miles or so with no streetlights, going through an area that seemed to be full of open rock quarries. It was this huge open space, and it was honestly quite breathtaking to look at while driving through as well. At the end of this road was a right turn that would put me on a road that led directly to the neighborhood just before my turn in to work. I started using this road to commute to work whenever I could see roadwork, construction, heavy traffic, etc. on the horizon. I got pretty used to the scenery, and over time I began to suspect that these quarries were currently defunct, or at least not currently in operating season. There were never any cars or workers around when I'd drive down it. I never saw any lights or hints of the big towers overlooking them doing anything either. In fact, a lot of the machinery was in a state where it either looked like it was just starting to rust, or it had been put on a long break for a long time. I never really thought about this too much though. I just drove that long road to work, mostly always in the daytime. On this one particular night though, I remember I hadn't managed to grab a day shift for a long while. Getting shifts at Amazon can be super competitive for part-timers since it's a first-come, first-served basis on A to Z grabbing them. They all pop up at the same time every day for everyone, except for a select few. Unfortunately, my luck ran out. Driving down to work, I saw the familiar sight of a bunch of cones and signs indicating that construction was ongoing, and I'd need to take a detour. Well, crap, I guess it's time to hit that long quarry road again for the first time in a while. Now, I should note here that I'd never actually been down this road at night before. As I made the move to turn onto it, it was mostly already dark out. I looked down at that huge empty space of complete darkness laid out in front of me as far as the eye could see. I honestly began to feel the first inklings of a chill creeping on. It looked extremely creepy, sure, but I'd never actually seen anybody on this road before, so surely there should be nothing to worry about. I had now driven the first 3 miles or so with nothing but my headlights lighting up the area in front of my car now. I remember distinctly, I kept having those intrusive thoughts where you imagine yourself not seeing a divot in the road or something because it's so dark. You end up veering into the machinery and dying a horrible death or whatever. I was startled out of these daydreams when I thought I began to see something coming up on the road about a mile ahead or so. I couldn't exactly tell what it was at first, but as I started to get a bit closer, I could see what appeared to be a car directly in the middle of the road. It appeared to be parked diagonally through the street, with yellow cones laid out on either side of it, blocking access from going any further. As I approached and started to slow down to stop, this was only a 2-lane road, mind you. I was extremely confused at seeing such an out-of-place object here. I noticed the car was a truck of some sort, not too dissimilar to what you might see from actual construction workers parked on the side of the road next to a site. At this point, I was forced to completely come to a stop at this blockade, but now I was even more confused. I couldn't see any construction equipment or even any materials anywhere. I also didn't see any workers around. How could construction be going on with such low lighting anyway? I started to get real scared at this point. I decided to throw my car in reverse, do a 3-point turn on this narrow road, and go back the way I had come from. I looked back into my rearview mirror at this point, just to make sure the road was clear out of instinct. I laughed at myself for doing this. There were still no cars coming down this road. I mean, why would there be? As my headlights whipped around the turn, I could no longer see the roadblock because of the darkness. What I could see now, though, some few hundred feet away in the distance, barely illuminated in the headlights, was what appeared to be a second car, a black sedan, now blocking the direction I had just come from, and parked directly front to back, blocking off the entire road. Fight or flight activated immediately. I could feel my heart begin beating out of my chest and hear it beating in my ears as well. I'd seen these things in horror movies, but this couldn't possibly be real, right? In my moment of panic, I tried to turn around again, now halfway between these two blockages of the road. My headlights whipped around once more, only this time, they seemed to bounce off of something as I turned around. I stopped mid-turn in surprise, only to see what appeared to be a construction worker walking out of the area near the entrance to the quarry, an area which had been hidden behind a small hill. I'd missed this at first because I'd been pointed straight ahead, but now that I was at a light angle, I could see the man appeared to have been hiding there the entire time. He swiftly began to walk toward my car with purpose. I was already skeeved out. All of this had happened within the span of just under half a minute. I was starting to get overwhelmed. Something was clearly wrong here. This man wasn't wearing a proper orange reflective vest either, but what appeared to be some kind of mesh with reflective tape placed on it haphazardly. It was just slightly off from the real thing, but something that could have easily fooled someone on a dark road from far away. I started driving forward at this point, deciding, fuck it, I'm just gonna go through those cones. There's gotta be enough room. My car started to speed up, and out of the corner of my eye, I could see the man talking into something, perhaps a phone or walkie-talkie. I couldn't really tell in the dark.
Hey, you! Stop right there! There's construction! You gotta stop!
I floored it. I could make out the car in my rear view now reorienting itself with its headlights on, turning to face the same direction I was now going. Talk about a damn horror movie. I swerved around the truck in the center of the road in front of me, nearly plowing my car into one of the little divots on the side of the road like a dumbass and sending those cones flying out of the way. The man on foot started to sprint to his truck now too. It seemed the chase was on. We sped down the rest of that unlit road at nearly 65 miles per hour, as both cars now followed behind me, now flashing their high beams and honking like crazy. Honestly, it was so bright because of the area that it was kind of blinding me from the reflection in my mirrors. I had to turn them away from me just so I could continue to drive. At one point, since it was a straight line shot, one of the cars pulled into the oncoming traffic lane and tried to pull up alongside me. I could only guess they were going to try to ram me into the ditch or something before I could make it to the end of the road and have an out. As it turns out though, 10 miles or so is not really that far to go when you're driving at high speeds and in a straight line with no traffic at all. I mean, sure, it feels like an eternity while you're in the moment, even more when you're being chased by psychos for almost 7 whole minutes. But before I knew it, we had reached the intersection at the end of the road, turning back into the populated neighborhood areas. As I continued to speed towards this crossroads, I saw both cars behind me now begin to slow down considerably and turn off their headlights before ceasing following me altogether. In my panic, I kinda forgot about work and that right turn I needed to take. I mean, who the fuck cares about work in the moment when something like that happens to you anyway? Instead, I turned left, back toward the way I'd need to get home. I just needed to be anywhere but here right now. For the rest of the drive back, I sat in silence, thinking about what had just happened to me. I don't know why, but it occurred to me in that moment that I might get written up since I didn't have enough PTO to cover this missed shift. I also thought about what I was going to tell my mom when I got home. I was so worried about getting into trouble for some reason. When I hurriedly pulled into my garage and sat there sobbing for 5 minutes though, my mom came out to hear my story, and she was not particularly angry with me for whatever reason. She did encourage me to call the police though, because that was some seriously shady shit going down. I did, but of course by the time they made it out there, the perpetrators were long gone from the area. I never did manage to find out what it was all about. I imagine they wanted to rob some unsuspecting passerby thinking it would be a good detour and capitalize on the construction going on nearby. The only thing I can't really figure out is why the guy was hiding behind that little hill like that. If he'd been there at the truck itself, he could have probably easily caught me off guard. I don't know, maybe they didn't want people being turned off from so far away because of the reflective vest or something. I'm no expert on roadside banditry. Oh, and yes, if you're wondering, I did get written up in the end, even after explaining what happened to my supervisor. I mean, I know policy is policy and all, but still, that's kinda messed up, isn't it? So this story is kind of long. I'm going to try to condense it as much as I can so it doesn't drag on. In the fall of 2019, I was going through a really rough patch. I was extremely depressed and in a very dark place at the time. When my friend invited me to go to the Davy Crockett National Forest with him to camp, I was more than happy to oblige him. We decided we would camp at the Ratcliffe Lake campgrounds for 2 nights. Then the third, we would stay at a free camping spot, somewhere off the miles of park roads scattered throughout the forest. The first couple of nights went by amazingly. I loved the smell of pines, especially in East Texas. and the campsite was beautiful, not to mention the lake. We did some kayaking and hiking, and the views really helped out my mindset. It was actually really awesome. On the third morning, however, my friend suddenly got an emergency call and had to bail out at the last second. I was slightly upset, but it didn't necessarily mean I had to go home just because he did. I decided to still stick to the original plan and find a place to camp deep within that forest. After he left, I headed to the nearest forest information center and snagged myself a map. The map showed the nearby highways and forest. I scouted a couple of park roads and made my way towards them. After maybe 5 miles out of town, I finally found a park road, which was indicated by a numbered sign. This was only a dirt road. I headed down it and settled in for adventure. The road was not very narrow, but it would have been a hassle to move 2 trucks around each other, which I didn't really encounter. I kept the map on my lap and followed that road with my fingers, while I also checked the road ahead for potholes. The woods got super dense around me, and darker as well. It all kind of just enveloped my truck. I don't know how many miles I traveled before I first came to another turnoff, but it was clear I was super deep in these woods. I had traveled to where one group of campsites was supposed to be, which was a small loop. I turned around and to my surprise was met with a couple of trucks and RVs, all occupants outside cleaning guns or dressing deer. Please don't come at me, I've never been hunting. It was hunting season, so I guess it wasn't that big of a surprise, but it was still very off-putting with the dirty looks I was receiving. I made the loop and carried on instead of stopping there. I continued to drive a few more miles and found another very remote spot at the very corner of these woods. I pulled over and set up the tent and a fire and brought out the whiskey. I did not have a very great night and was burning some letters as well. I got a little bit more messed up than I would have cared to be. I ate some food, put out the fire, and headed into the tent to play my Switch and wind down. It didn't take me too long to fall asleep, and I slept real hard. I woke up suddenly though at maybe 1 a.m. to the sound of footsteps encircling my campsite. I'm a pretty avid camper, so at first I assumed it was a critter checking out the human who decided to chill in its pad without asking. I started to drift off again when I heard a low cough. Instantly, I shot awake. I just kinda laid there, listening. The footsteps approached my truck. I had locked it thankfully, but I heard the obvious signs of someone trying the handle. They then shuffled over to the other side and tried the other one as well. I had a spotlight I had brought with me, so I quietly unzipped the tent and pointed my light in the direction of the noise. I shouted out. I caught a very brief glimpse of whoever it was, dressed all in camo. They sprinted off into the woods with no light. They took off. Although I had no plans of following them, I scanned the brush with my light and couldn't see a single thing. I turned off my light to see if I could see a phone light or a flashlight maybe, but instead I heard very loud crashing into the brush that got quieter and further away. Whoever this person was running into those dark woods with no lights and all camo on. Considering the map, the direction he ran did not have any more roads or amenities, so maybe this was private property. I don't know, but I was very scared. I collapsed my tent, shoved it in the fucking bag, shoved that in my back seat, and drove the park roads like a bat out of hell. Once I got back to the main road, I drove 4 hours back to my hometown. I do want to go back sometime, but with friends and maybe a gun. Yeah, that was not a fun experience, and definitely up there as one of the most frightening things that's ever happened to me in the woods. On second thought, actually, I think the dude might have had night vision goggles just for this sort of occasion. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed this new format. If you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you're wondering which story was the fake story out of all those stories, the one that I wrote personally is number 3. None of those events actually happened. It's just based on a particularly creepy road that actually was a big defunct quarry space that was right near the area I worked at when I worked at Whole Foods as an Amazon shopper. I do hope that you guys found it spooky though, because that area was really scary at night, especially one time when I had to drive back from a friend's house and there really was some construction and I had to take that road. It was so dark, it was crazy. Anyways, if you guys would like to contact me for any reason, please take a look in the description below. You'll find links to all of my social media, including my Gmail, Facebook, and Twitter accounts. Be sure to send me a message on any of those and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you'd like to send in your own true story for me to read, or now send in a fictional story that I can include on one of these videos as well if you'd like, go ahead and send me a message on any of those. Please be sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and also try to have proper paragraph spacing and grammatical structure if possible. It makes it a lot easier to read during the videos. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include what the name of the story is, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Overall, guys, I think that's pretty much it for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have the most wonderful day.